didn't want to invest in funds that other companies were just going to make money off of.
Today, we are here with a special guest, Jared, who is a former Tesla employee. He's a current client of Rebellionaire. And we're here to share Jared's story, both with Tesla and with Rebellionaire. We're going to cover his transition from Rockwell Automation to Tesla, talk about some of his time with Tesla, talk about maybe some financial things relating to stock options and margin and Tesla stock, and what it's been like with us, with myself, Matt Smith, and others here at Rebellionaire.com. So, Jared, glad to have you on.
Nice to be with you.
Tell us about your educational and professional background and how you came to work for Tesla.
I went to Penn State University, did electromechanical engineering technology. That was where I was first introduced into the manufacturing and automation equipment side of engineering. That's where I got my first experience with PLCs, motors, servos, and other manufacturing equipment.
And what's a PLC?
Programmable logic controller. The programmable piece of equipment that controls all the automation in every factory manufacturing setting, water, wastewater. A lot of different industries use a PLC because they are a specific device that's hardened and designed to just do the same thing day after day after day.
So what was it you were doing for Rockwell, and how did that transition happen with Tesla?
After college, I got a job with Rockwell Automation, one of the large PLC manufacturers based in Milwaukee. I worked for them for quite a few years, got a lot of experience going to different customer sites in a lot of different industries, from bakeries to large auto manufacturers in the Midwest and Ohio area. After I left Rockwell, I went to work for a distributor for their equipment for a little while. Then I worked for a system integrator that did projects with Rockwell Automation and other vendors' products. We were doing a lot of work in oil and gas. We were doing natural gas compression stations. We were doing coal-fired power plants. And I realized I don't see this being the future. I don't see these industries being where I want to put my time and effort. I don't want my resume in 5 to 10 years to say I've been working on coal-fired power plants for the last 10 years. I knew I wanted to make a change, go somewhere cutting edge into newer technologies around 2016, early 2017. One thing led to another. I started talking with a Tesla recruiter and started doing a little bit of research. I didn't really know that much about Tesla or EVs or really anything in the space, but hurried up and quickly did some research and tried to determine, is this kind of the place that I'm looking for? Obviously, coming from that old energy background, I knew the energy space, the manufacturing space, and I realized this could be a very good place to work. Around the same time, I had also kind of taken over my own investments. Before that, I kind of had a friend of a friend who had some funds that they had put some of my money in, and it wasn't doing very good. So I was taking that over, learning more about investing myself, moving things into my own funds and taking control of that. So I was looking at it from a lens of not only a job position, but also a investment position.
Tell me more about that. Was it because Tesla gave stock or stock options to all employees?
I didn't know that at first until I talked with the recruiting team. Then I realized that was something they did. I started doing the math and looking into things as far as my 401ks that are rolled over into IRAs. Is this a way to help speed up acquiring investments and building an investment portfolio that can get me through retirement? So when I started digging into it, they finally gave me the offer to come work for them. We had the ability to choose between shares, RSUs, and options. I remember talking to the recruiter at the time, and after I got approved or accepted to work there, and I was like, yes, I'll take all options. And they were like, wait, are you sure? I haven't worked with anybody that's done all options before. Most people just take the RSUs. I was like, if it works and if it doesn't work, I'm going to be looking for a new job anyway. Like, what's the difference? If it doesn't work, I might as well. I ran the math and saw the 50% upside. If it runs 50% or more from where it was, options would be the better choice. I wasn't thinking 20%. I was thinking it would go up a lot more than that. So I chose options at the beginning, and every opportunity for performance and incentives after that, I chose options every time I was allowed to.
Curious, what was your role when you first joined, and how did that evolve? I know you ended up at Gigafactory Nevada, but I'm curious around a little history of that as well.
Yeah. Moved from Pennsylvania out here to Nevada to work. At the time, there wasn't much production running when I got here. There was really one production line making battery modules for the old Power Pack product before Megapack. I came in under the sustaining team, which is supposed to keep the existing equipment running, do modifications, improvements, things like that. I believe I was one of the first hires on the sustaining team at Giga Nevada with specific expertise. They have manufacturing teams, they have controls teams, they have sustaining teams. And at the time, like I said, I was one of the first controls people. So was mainly just there to work on that existing line, make it run a little better, make it make more parts per day, get rid
Mhm.
of any issues with downtime, get rid of any issues with quality concerns, then transitioned all over the factory to different things.
How different was it compared to working at a client site for Rockwell Automation?
I mean, it was very similar in the sense that, when I was working for Rockwell, I was doing field service engineering. I was getting called out to work on equipment that had been installed for 10, 20, 50 years and wasn't working and needed to work on stuff. Or I was getting called out for equipment just being built. Maybe a customer was building some equipment for somebody else and they needed help at the end of kind of the build phase of equipment before you turn it into actual running equipment. There's a phase called FAT, functional acceptance test, or factory acceptance test, depending on who you talk to. I would work with customers going through FAT test and needed assistance, whether they were having problems or just wanted an expert there in case they had issues. Customers would do these 8-hour FAT tests where the equipment would have to run for 8 hours without faulting before the customer would take it over. So I had experience in kind of the old equipment, the new equipment, doing startups, working on old equipment. When I went to Tesla, I thought I would only be working on new equipment,
No.
but there was a lot of equipment they had scavenged from the California plant. There was equipment in the old NUMMI plant that had been around for a very long time and had very old PLCs. Luckily, I had experience on those pieces of equipment, some of those old drives and networks, 10, 20 years old, even though it was a brand new factory. We had to work on that equipment as well as the brand new stuff that was going in.
Mhm.
It's a very similar experience to the field service work I had done with Rockwell.
Sounds very rewarding. Did you ever sleep on the line at the factory?
No, I would go home and sleep. I didn't think it was efficient to not get good sleep at the factory.
So you made a fateful decision choosing to do stock options that made a really big difference for you financially.
Mhm.
And there's different types of stock options with employee stock options.
Yeah.
There's stock options that are called non-qualified, where essentially you end up paying income tax up to the price you exercise them. Most of Elon's stock options are non-qualified. When he exercises them, he might pay like 53% tax on those. So you had a chunk that was non-qualified, but also ISO stock options.
Yeah.
You have to pay a minimum tax between the strike price, which
Yeah.
can be pretty low because you got a chunk of yours like around 2017,
Yeah.
and the current price of whenever you exercise, you have to pay what's called an alternative minimum tax when you exercise those.
Yeah. Coming and starting working there, didn't know anything about taxing and the different types of options. Quickly had to learn because it was something that they didn't really cover inside of Tesla. They didn't really go through a lot of the details between ISOs, NQSOs, RSUs, ESPP. They spoke about them a little bit. I didn't feel that they did the best job explaining that to all employees. I remember the first few years, a lot of us at lunchtime sitting down and talking about things. And obviously, one of the things that we would talk about a lot was the stock and the options. And hey, there's this grant coming up. And should I take RSUs? Should I take options? We would just come together as a team, a group of people trying to understand all of these different things. In the beginning, I think there was a lot more of the ISOs than the non-quals. Later, it seemed like they were transitioning more towards the non-quals. There were a couple grants that we didn't even have the opportunity to choose options anymore. And some of them were only allowed to choose RSUs. That was not something I ever thought I would be studying and trying to figure out. But it became immediately apparent that it was something that I needed to understand and deep dive into. So we had spreadsheets and stuff that we had made up with people could type in their information and stock prices to try to figure out whether they should take RSUs or whether they should take options, whether they should split between the two. And it became, I really started to learn a lot more about 2017 through 2020 or so.
Eventually, you ended up reaching out to me. I'm curious, this started around late 2022. What caused you to reach out to me then?
I think the main thing was I had been doing all of this on my own. I took the opportunity to come out here on my own and figured out as much as I could about the stock and options on my own. I knew I was getting close to a point where I might not work there anymore. I knew that I was going to have to exercise options, and I knew that I was reaching the limits of the knowledge that I had on, I understand their value, but I don't know how to maximize the execution strategy of the ISO, the tax information that goes into figuring out the AMT, alternative minimum tax, versus regular income tax, and the cost basis and whether to sell in short term or long term. I understood the concept of, yes, get as many shares as you can, hold them, and get as many of them to long-term status. Beyond that, I knew it was going to be more than I wanted to bite off. Moving from just collecting them into a strategy where I knew that I was going to need to exercise options. I knew that I was going to need to sell some for tax purposes. And I knew that there was probably some other things out there that I wasn't thinking of. I think it's easy to think you can do stuff on your own when things are simple, but as it gets more complex, I realized I could use some help. When I was working through the financial advisor teams at the companies that hold the Tesla stock while I was an employee, those conversations didn't go the way I wanted. They were standard. You have a very concentrated position. You should probably get rid of that concentrated position and get into the funds that we offer, where we make money off of these funds. Yeah. And those conversations they weren't what I wanted to hear. I didn't want my money to go make money for somebody else. I didn't want to invest in funds that other companies were just going to make money off of. So I started searching to see if I could find anybody in the financial space that wasn't one of these large companies that just had funds that wanted to get you into so that they could make their money. I also wanted to keep my concentrated position. I wanted somebody that understood the company I was concentrated in. It wasn't going to work for me not to have a conversation with my financial planner, my financial advisor, about the main investment that I have, and have an intelligent conversation about, what the company's doing and where they're going. That just didn't seem possible with a lot of other investment companies.
Ultimately, you believe in the future for Tesla. You wanted to own Tesla specifically. Is that right?
Yeah. Like I said, when I started transitioning out of legacy power generation work back in 2017, I saw the writing on the wall. Everything else I use is electric motors. All of the work I had done from college on, we were doing things with electric motors and inverters and converters and batteries. And I thought this does seem inevitable. Tesla isn't some grand idea that came out of nowhere. And I really used to look at this through a lens of, is this going to happen? There was so much negativity, positivity, everything in between.
Mm.
just to remove the noise and say, is this going to happen? And if it's going to happen, where is that value going to go?
Mhm.
And I felt like, yeah, I think Tesla is at a very good position to capitalize on that. After the EV thing started to play out and solidify, AI and self-driving became more of a focus the farther along that things went. And again, I arrived at the same conclusion. There may be some things that I would do differently, but this is the right path. Coming from an automation background and automating equipment my entire life, I realized that ever since the Stone Age, we've been automating equipment. Technology works to make us do our jobs faster, and that's what technology does.
One of our first challenges working together was dealing with your ISOs and non qualified stock options. Generally speaking, you're best off exercising ISOs at lowest prices possible so you can minimize that alternative minimum tax that you pay.
Right.
So you did some of that, but then you chose to go into some margin to avoid paying some tax. We also did exercise some non-qualified at a higher price than we exercised the ISOs. That was a good deal. After we, started to do some of that, what was your impression of working with us? How did it change?
I understood the general concepts of exercising and different taxes. I had exercised a little before we started working together. It wasn't a whole lot. I knew that upon exercising, I was going to have some tax implications depending on timings and where the stock price was compared to where it had been over the past few years. There's always opportunities where you're like, yeah, I want to exercise these, but I don't want to sell a bunch to pay the taxes. We discussed, and I said, I'm willing to take on a little bit of margin to sell things at a later time. And we took on some margin, and there's value in using that margin where you're going to pay some money. There are chances that you put something on margin and end up selling it later for the same price, but also opportunities where you put something on margin and sell it 6 to 12 months later for 50% more.
Mhm.
And yeah, you paid some margin interest, but when you do all the final math and figure out where you would have sold, where you did sell, taxes, etc., it can be a valuable tool if you use it sparingly and not go overboard. And I think that's one of the good things in working with you. These tools are there, and if you don't understand them, like there was a lot of things that we had started to play around with that I didn't really understand. I felt very comfortable to ask you and Matt lots of different questions and say, hey, I get this part, but can you explain a little bit more so that I fully understand and feel comfortable with what we're doing? Because every strategy has pros and cons, risks and rewards. The biggest part of making me feel comfortable doing any given strategy is just being able to fully understand it myself.
Mhm.
And that comes with being able to talk with you and the team and say, hey, I want to understand what we're doing here. Or if it's past tense, say, here's what we did. Can you explain such and
Mhm.
such?
Jared's not paid to do this. I'm not sending him any kind of gift or anything like that for doing this. I do want to talk a little bit about when you were done with Tesla. People may not know, but when you're done with a company, you have 90 days to exercise stock options. Regardless of progress, you have to do it all at once. Your ability to time it shrinks. Maybe you could talk about that and what it's like for you.
Yeah, we discussed earlier about first talking in 2022. I knew at the time this 90-day window existed and there was going to be a lot more happening with the exercising and the execution and the planning. As we talked about, that was one of the driving factors behind getting somebody to help me with what I knew was going to be a more complex time than just working there and getting the vests and putting them in my account. I had done a good job up until then of not selling shares, holding on to as many as possible, to paying taxes on stuff as it came in as much as I could without having to sell and cover. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. With options, you have to pay the initial price to purchase. And I knew
Mhm.
that was going to involve moving money around and trying to figure out how to optimize. I knew it was going to involve selling some of those shares. Luckily, I originally thought that was going to be the last time I was going to sell shares, and my share count would continually go down from that point on. That was sad after talking with you and understanding, yes, your share count will go down when we go through these things. It doesn't have to stay down. There are ways to get some of those shares back.
Mhm.
That was reassuring that came up, that wasn't something that maybe was initially on my I need a financial advisor for XYZ items. After talking with you and understanding, like, yeah, there will be times where it's up, we can trim some, and it will go down, and we can get some of that share count back potentially. And that was a very positive revelation during that time of being ready to get out and move on.
I want to caution people that are watching, especially if you're a Tesla employee with ISOs or non-qualifieds. What I do for Jared is probably not going to be the same what I do for you. Each situation is different. It's going to present itself differently. So you separated with Tesla, was it last summer? So then you had a big tax bill coming up. You essentially had to exercise all your remaining stock options last summer.
Yep.
So your margin went up. You had a big tax bill. I'm curious, we decided preemptively to do a trim to raise money for taxes before April and to pay off your margin completely. It's a big financial decision when you have stock options.
Yeah.
What did you think about doing that in February? The stock was near 350 a share when we did that.
Yeah, I mean, it was, like you said, it was something that we knew was coming as we went towards the end of the year talking about it. We had the choice to do it at the end of 2024 in the same tax year as the rest of the stuff. After discussing, we said, I think it'll be best if we wait until early 2025 to do this move, square up for 2024, and push some sales into 2025 to split them between tax years. The stock price went up a lot, and we were able to sell for a lot more than we would have been able to sell them back when we took on that original margin. Had we done everything at the same time last summer,
Mhm.
it would have been a net negative compared to the way we did it. Timing works out different for everybody. The timing worked out well for us to trim at a high point, to get rid of that margin. Going forward, that takes a lot of burden, anxiety away from being not only all in, but being margined, very dedicated and pushed to be able to take some of that off and square back up and say, okay, we're still all in, but now we're at a better position to take advantage of a drop coming in the future potentially.
Now, I'm not pushing you, Jared, to go back into margin, but if people are going to use it, you might as well take advantage of it. Try to take off your margin when the stock's high, when emotions are high.
Yeah.
That gives you ammunition if you want to go into margin again to do that at a lower price. Easier said than done.
Yeah.
But with margin or other forms of leverage, swings in wealth can be pretty significant. There are chances of losses with margin or options. So be careful with that. Jared's risk tolerance is not your risk tolerance. Did you ever have any concerns or doubts working with us?
No, I mean, back to the margin question, having a little bit of margin, one of the good things we discussed was keeping those margin levels very low and conservative. A margin call would have only happened if the stock had gone to very low double digits. It was a concern, but it wasn't one that I felt was overly risk taking. I felt like it was a small percent of margin that allowed us to capitalize and move around. We didn't do anything too dangerous. It was within my uh, risk portfolio. It's been really good working with you and Matt and everybody on the team. I had originally looked into needing financial advice. I knew about the executions and the things I was doing as I transitioned out, but I didn't know there were other possibilities I hadn't considered. And hadn't I considered certain things, but there's a level of time and detail, energy that goes into doing all this work. I knew I was probably not willing to continue to put the amount of time and effort and energy that I had been putting in towards researching and understanding every single aspect of the investments. I wanted to be able to have somebody to work with that was also putting in that same amount of energy, effort, and research to learn and understand the investments. When you invest in the S&P 500, you don't know anything about these 500 companies. You're not investing, you're just putting your money in a different bank account. It will grow. It's not really risky. It might not give you much reward. It's a good idea for anybody that doesn't have any type of investment. At least get something, like get something in the S&P 500 or whatever it is. But I wasn't, interested in just a couple percent guaranteed gains. I wanted to be able to stay investing in this technology space where there's a lot of converging technologies coming together, and the businesses that capitalize on those are going to make a lot of money and
Mhm.
therefore make money for their investors. It's been an adventurous journey so far, and I don't think the excitement is going to die down into the future.
So, past performance is no guarantee of future results. Results I got for Jared aren't typical of a client experience, but they were meaningful as far as defraying some taxes or paying off margin. Well, thank you, Jared, for sharing about your Tesla story and stock options. I'm Bradford Ferguson with Rebellionaire.com. Bye for now.